This evening, I take great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Alison Sheridan, who, amongst many other accolades, is the current archaeology's archaeologist of the year 2020. She's also a research associate of the Department of Scottish History and Archaeology with the National Museum Scotland, an honorary research fellow in archaeology of the University of Edinburgh, the vice president of Archaeology Scotland, as well as a great supporter of Kilmartin Museum too. I've been looking forward to this evening's talk tonight, as Dr. Sheridan is going to speak to us about the Poltalloch jet jewellery in context, examining supernatural power dressing. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Dr. Alison Sheridan.
Thank you very, very much, Jacqueline. And hello, everybody. It's just fantastic to see you. And hello, Annie in Belfast. Hello to the lady in Vancouver. You're so lucky to live there. So I'm very grateful to have been asked to talk to you tonight on a topic that's really very dear to my heart, and it has been much on my mind for the last 30 plus years, would you believe? On and off, that is. The spacer plate necklace and bracelet from Poltalloch, and what this magnificent set of jewellery can tell us about the early Bronze Age people who buried their illustrious dead in Kilmartin Glen around 4,000 years ago. Now, since this is an online event, I don't know how many of you had yet have the immense pleasure of visiting Kilmartin Museum since its complete overhaul, thanks to the brilliance and very, very hard work of our host, Sharon Webb, expertly assisted by Aaron Watson and the team. But if you have visited, you'll have seen this jewellery on prominent display, looking resplendent on its bold, bright green background. It's currently on loan from its permanent home in the Early People Gallery of the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. So if you haven't visited Kilmartin Museum yet, I urge you to do so before it returns there towards the end of the year. And I urge everybody to go and visit the museum in any case, because it's absolutely wonderful and you'll be enthralled, educated and entertained at every turn. Now, in preparing this necklace and bracelet for a display here at the end of 2022, I had the opportunity and privilege to re-examine and record the necklace and bracelet in detail, some 32 years after I first studied them, alongside my friend, colleague and fellow jet setter, Dr. Mary Davis, who analysed them at the National Museum for her University of Durham Conservation Diploma work way back in 1990. Here's a picture of Mary at Emma Jones's fabulous jetworking workshop held recently, just a few months ago of this March, in the Education Centre in Kilmartin Museum. And on the right, you can see one of Mary's X-ray fluorescence spectrometry spectra of one of the jet beads with its characteristic zirconium peak. You can just about see there. And also here, this is a very interesting plot that compares the iron and zirconium content with the colour of the beads. It's Mary who spotted that the small black beads of the bracelet, which she referred to as mouse droppings, because that's rather what they look like, all seem to be high in iron and low in zirconium, and they're likely to be of cannel coal or shale rather than jet. And in fact, it was as a result of Mary's work that we realised that there was a bracelet present in the first place. Nobody had spotted that before, so that was exciting stuff. The work that I did in 2022, along with colleagues at National Museum's Collection Centre, to prepare the jewellery for its display at Kilmartin, involved removing the necklace and bracelet from their existing perspex mount, de-stringing them, and making sure to keep a note of which beads are which, since every component has a number, and then putting the component pieces under a WYSI microscope before re-stringing the jewellery, X-raying it, which is absolutely fantastic for seeing the drill holes, as you can see, and finally sewing it onto its new mount, which was an immensely fiddly and complicated job done with great skill and great patience by conservator Lynn McLean. And you can see here the back of the mount and the very long threads that extend out. You do not want to have short threads. Oh, no, no, no. You don't want this to fall to bits. So this work has shed new light on the traces of manufacture and wear, allowing us to recreate the fascinating life history of this set of jewellery. But before describing the necklace and bracelet in detail, first, I want to describe how and when the jewellery was discovered and what happened to it afterwards. I'll then take you through what we can say about how the necklace and bracelet were made and how they were worn and by whom. And I'll then put this jewellery in its wider context, firstly by considering where it fits into the prehistory of the early Bronze Age, prehistory of Kilmartin Glen, and then where it fits in with the bigger picture of jet spacer plate necklaces, and within the early Bronze Age vocabulary of esteem, that is, the ways in which power and status were signalled, particularly through jewellery and other such things. And finally, I'll be exploring the Poltalloch jewellery as an example of supernatural power dressing. That is, the use of special materials to create bodily ornamentation that wasn't just a pretty thing or a signifier of power, status, and wealth, but which actually had active agency, so the wearers believed, in protecting its wearer against harm, both in life and after death. So let's start at the beginning, with the discovery of the Poltalloch jewellery. We have this archaeologist, James Hewitt Craw, to thank for this. On the occasion of a visit to Kilmartin Glen by the members of the Ancient Monuments Commission in April 1928, the visitor's attention was drawn to a short kist, that's a stone box-shaped grave, at the edge of a gravel pit dug into a gravel bank not far from the North Lodge of Poltalloch House. It's the one marked C on the photo. This kist had been excavated by Thomas Bryce of Glasgow University in 1910, but near it was another kist in a precarious position. It's the one marked A on the photograph, and the landowner, Sir Ian Malcolm, decided to excavate it and to explore the area around the gravel pit. So Hewitt Craw went out to join him in August that year, and together they excavated 4 kists in the area to the northeast, where they found human remains but no grave goods. They sent the skulls from there to Professor Bryce in Glasgow, and they reburied the rest of the bones. They then tackled kist A, indicated here by a red arrow, and another nearby kist B. Because kist A had a large elm tree growing above it, they went in from the exposed end of the kist, removing the end stone. And here you can see the 3 kists in the area pointed out. There was no trace of any covering cairn for any of the kists that they found. They all seem to have been just set into the gravel ridge as a so-called flat early Bronze Age cemetery. When Craw removed the end slab of kist A, he noticed a vertical, narrow-pecked groove on either side and at either end, just inside the end slabs. He noticed the same feature in kist B, which you can see here, because it's clearer. And this led Craw to suggest that the kists had actually been lined with planks of wood. Although, given that kist B clearly had a carefully paved floor, I think it's more likely that it was just the ends of the kists that were lined. Elsewhere in Kilmartin Glen, in several kists, people had found wider vertical pecked rebates, and this is a technique that is borrowed from woodworking, to enable the end slabs to sit tightly and to help to make the kist watertight. This example from Baden reused stone that had been adorned nearly a millennium earlier with late Neolithic lozenge designs. This attention to constructional detail shows what care and effort had been expended on creating these kists in and around Kilmartin Glen. Anyway, after removing the end slab, Craw found that the interior of kist A was about 1/3 full of sand and gravel that had been bound into a compact mass by the roots of the elm tree. He commented in his report that was published promptly in the Proceedings of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland in January 1929 that the conditions of excavation were suboptimal, to put it mildly. He wrote, "To clear this out was no easy matter. Only one person could work at a time, and it took 6.5 hours before all the contents were cleared out." Gives us a fit of the vapours, but hey-ho. Craw found that the best tool to do this was a piece of strong wire bent at right angles, and they used this to comb through the roots. Really not ideal conditions for excavating anything. And as they got the contents out, the gravel was passed through a sieve. And it was an absolute miracle that anything came out intact. What he found were the beads and plates of what he took to be a necklace, along with a flint knife. You can see the knife in the centre of the necklace photo, and also in a recent very nice shot by National Museum Scotland on the right. These items were at the southwest part of the kist, the part that was most deeply filled and choked with roots, and was furthest from the opened end, so hardest to get to. In a circular area in the centre of the kist's floor, he found fragments of partly burnt bones, together with some charcoal, plus unburnt teeth and unburnt bones and some teeth. And the unburnt bones were very, very crumbly. The bones and teeth were sent to Professor Bryce at the University of Glasgow, who identified that 2 individuals were represented, one unburnt and one cremated or partly cremated. The unburnt remains, he was able to tell from the teeth, were those of a young adult, probably aged about 20 or 22, because their wisdom teeth had come in. It wasn't possible to sex them, but given the presence of jewellery, Craw assumed them to be female, and we can now say, thanks to many skeletons having been properly sexed elsewhere, it probably would, almost certainly would have been a female. Sadly, the bones weren't kept, or at least we don't think they were. Now that would be a great lead to chase up. Message to self, must get on to Glasgow University. Anyway, it's likely that the unburnt body had been buried in a crouched position on her side with the head to the southwest, wearing the jewellery. Also present in the kist were some lumps of ochre, a reddish substance, natural mineral substance that's been found in several other early Bronze Age kists, particularly in Kilmartin Glen. This may well have served a symbolic function associated with beliefs about death and the afterlife. What happened next was that Craw strung up the necklace as you see it here, according to how he thought the beads and plates had been arranged. He found 110 fusiform or barrel-shaped beads, 6 decorated plates, and a triangular item that initially puzzled him. He said that he made a note of the approximate positions of the components as he excavated them, but added that it was impossible to do this with any accuracy, the mass being so dense and the conditions of excavation so unfavourable, the work having to be done from the further end of the kist. But he did notice that most of the beads were found at a higher level than the plates. Every bead and every perforation of the plates was threaded, i.e. choked, with a tiny rootlet. So what you see is Craw's reconstruction based on highly problematic data. But in doing so, there you go. In doing so, he also considered how spacer plate necklaces had previously been reconstructed, as you can see from this Victorian version of the Balchalk spacer plate necklace from Angus. Craw said that the position of the spacer plates in the kist corresponded with the usual construction of jet necklaces more closely than expected, but that the position of the so-called pendant, the triangular piece, that bit here, and also that bit there, was more difficult to explain. As you can see, these had traditionally been reconstructed at the bottom of necklaces as if they were pendants. But Craw was forced to conclude correctly that this had actually been a fastener, not a pendant. It was found very close to the terminal plates. Anyway, Craw's reconstruction with this crisscross arrangement of the beads below the lower plates that we now know to be completely wrong was incredibly influential. And until the 90s, this was the way that museums displayed their spacer plate necklaces. And in some cases, the beads actually have been damaged as a result of that. Anyway, this discovery spurred Craw on to round up all the information then available about jet spacer plate necklaces, and in doing so, he rightly drew attention to their close similarity in shape and decoration to the thin sheet gold lunulae that have mostly been found in Ireland, with a few found in Britain. He also recognised that spacer plate necklaces of amber existed in Wessex and southern England. So his work really laid the foundations for all future studies of all subsequent studies, that is, of early Bronze Age spacer plate necklaces. So, what happened then to the Poltalloch necklace? Well, it went on display at the then named National Museum of Antiquities of Scotland. And then in 1990, I and Mary Davis took a closer look at it, as I said before. It then went through 3 transmogrifications as my understanding of this jewellery and of jet spacer plate necklaces more generally developed. Here you see a version that I did in the early 90s. It doesn't show the bracelet, but the bracelet was separate. And you'll note that I added a few FIMO beads. Those are the sort of lighter grey ones there, because I thought at the time, I assumed that the necklace hadn't been complete. And you'll see this looks quite oval and a bit saggy, but hey ho, we all feel like that, don't we? I'm oval and saggy, whatever, live with it. This diagram shows which components were confirmed by Mary's compositional analysis to be of Whitby jet. The fastener and 22 of the beads, including the ones from the bracelet, are of cannel coal or shale. And this shows the necklace and bracelet as they've been displayed in the early people gallery of the National Museum since 1998. Spot the difference. And here you can see it in its current reincarnation in Kilmartin Museum. I did do a couple of tweaks, minor tweaks, in 2022. And as you'll see, there are no FIMO beads now. It's all the real original beads. And I believe that the complete necklace had indeed been present, which is great. And it looks rounder, and it would lie higher on the neck, as is befitting of a skeuomorph of a gold lunula, which would also be quite rigid and quite high on the neck. And these superb visualizations have been done by Aaron Watson for Kilmartin Museum, and they are by far the best representation of what one of these things would have looked like. There are many photographs out there of people wearing replicas and things, but this is what they really would have looked like. So what can we say about its manufacture? Well, the necklace, at least, must have been made in North Yorkshire, God's own country, where specialist jet workers based around Whitby, that's within about 13 miles to north and south of Whitby, were making these things as valuable elite possessions between around 2200 and 1950 BC. The coast around Whitby, and also inland at the west end of the North York Moors, is where you get by far the best jet in Britain. And we know that it's been exploited from at least as early as around 3600 BC, if not earlier, right the way through to today, on and off, with a huge amount of exploitation in the Victorian period, because this is what Queen Victoria chose to wear as her mourning jewellery. So basically, what the spacer plates did in one of these necklaces was to allow the number of strands to be increased from the back of the necklace, where there were 4 strands, to the front of the necklace, where there are 7 strands. The beads vary in length, breadth, and shape, quite subtly, according to where they belong in the necklace. The shortest ones are in the interior. The longest ones are on the exterior. And within each of the strands below the lowest spacer plates, you find the longest bead in each of the strands is in the middle. Okay. The ones below the lowest spacer plates here, you'll find that they're actually flattish on 2 sides. And this is because it's quite a tight area here. And you've got to get 7 beads to stand neatly together without crowding each other out. So it's very beautifully done. And also the fusiform shape was quite deliberate because they wanted the beads to nestle, in adjacent strands, nestle against each other to create a sort of as solid a block of black as you could using this material. And likewise, the beads that go between the spacer plates tend to be quite plump because, again, what they're trying to do is to fill as much space as possible with them. So, I mean, it's superbly, cleverly done. Making this necklace would have taken weeks of work by a skilled specialist, although some parts of the manufacture process, such as the final polishing, might well have been done by assistants. And as you can see from this X-ray, and please ignore the rather wacky lettering about software, and the fact that the terminal plate is actually the wrong way around, but hey, never mind. Every single bead and plate had been drilled from either end, as you could see very clearly here. 3 different types of perforation are found with the plates, and a 4th was used for the fastener. With the fastener, it's 2 simple through-bored holes here, from front to back. The holes in the terminal plates were elbow bored. That is, they created a sort of L-shaped perforation by going in from the end of the bead and going in from the back of the bead. This was easier to do than the more complicated borings, but the downside of it was that it weakens the jet. And if you pull too hard, you're going to get bits falling off there. Luckily for them, they didn't on this particular necklace. Then on the spacer plates, on the upper spacer plates here, where they're going from 4 to 4, these are simple through perforations. So they that far down, and then they came in from the other side that way up. For the more complicated ones, where they needed to get 4 to 7, it's a combination of a straight through perforation and an inverted Y perforation, which is really, really quite tricky to do. And note for anybody who's making one of these things, when you actually come to string them up, you have to start at the bottom and work your way upwards, because if you try and do the other way round, it can be incredibly difficult to get a piece of thread to go which way down the hole that you want it to go. Okay, so that's a little hint and tip. Now, obviously too, the knotting at the ends would have been incredibly important, because the last thing you want, of all these things really want to do, is to fall to pieces and skitter all over the floor. So you have to be very good at knotting. As for what the thread would have been, it's certain to have been organic and strong. You don't want something that is going to stretch. The possibilities include sinew or bast, which is just below the bark of a tree, and you can get very strong bast thread. None has yet been found, but whenever I do my 6 week of intense work on these things, I always look to see if there are traces. And on this slide here, you can see the elbow holes on one of the terminal plates very clearly. I've flipped it over so that you can see the back side of it. Now, would all of the 7 threads have continued as far up and gone through the top of this? We just honestly don't know. Another thing you could do would be to knot them at the bottom here, there. I mean, certainly what you can say is that there is clear wear, there's thread wear to the top of the hole here. But at the bottom, there isn't significant wear. So actually, if your threads had gone all the way through and it had been worn for a very long time, you would expect to see softening and hollows being worn by the threads there, and sometimes in the back of the necklace. But maybe it was just the case that it wasn't worn long enough for this to develop. And you can see here in more detail the hole at the top of the terminal plate here, and how the thread has worn a very clear groove into that there. I mean, that thread will have taken the whole weight of the necklace. As for the toolkit and the processes of manufacture, simple but requires great skill. So we're dealing with the processes of cutting, grinding, drilling, perforating, and making small indentations in the plates, the spacer plates, to create the pointillé decoration. You can cut jet with a flint knife, and quite often it would produce little micro hollows in the jet. You can drill it with a tiny little metal drill, which is a narrow wire, probably of bronze, probably 2 millimeters wide or less. And here you see Mary Davis using a pump drill. Now, the thing is, also the end of the drill would have been probably chisel ended, or sometimes diamond ended. Now, you have to be careful with jet because it tends to overheat and crack very easily. And the 19th century jet workers used umbrella spokes because this cut down the danger of the jet from cracking, overheating and cracking. But certainly if you use a pump action drill rather than the bow drill, it's quite easy to control the speed at which the drill goes. And it's a very, very effective way of making holes. And also, you can do this yourself if you attend one of Ancient Crafts' Emma Jones's excellent jet working workshops. So much of the shaping will have been done by grinding the jet against an abrasive stone, sandstone. And for polishing, they would have used increasingly fine abrasives, and almost certainly also they would have used jet dust, probably mixed with animal fat. The perforation will have been done at an early stage in the roughing out process, as it's the riskiest. Here's one that Hal Redvers-Jones, who is one of the last traditional Whitby jet workers, has made earlier. And you can see, to make a fusiform bead, you'd start off with basically a square sectioned thing. You would then perforate it, and then you would grind it into sort of an octagonal shape, and then you keep grinding until it's this lovely barrel shape. And you can see what a brilliant shine can be got from the best quality hard jet. And here too, on this edge of a spacer plate, you can see here, these are little grinding striations from where the edge of the plate was actually ground against a piece of sandstone to make sure it was nice and flat. And here, this is a spacer plate from a different necklace from Balgay near Dundee, where it has split in two. And not only can you see the shape of the end of the drill hole here, but you can see the rilling that was caused, these horizontal lines that were caused by the rotation of the drill bit here. So what about traces of wear? Well, there are quite a few indications that this necklace was not new. Oh, sorry. As for decorating the spacer plates, it was made with pointillé decoration, and there were 3 designs featuring diamonds in 2 cases and a saltire design, as you can see in this case here. When you look very closely, you can see not only the round bases of these shallow borings, but the hints of very, very thinly, faintly inscribed, scratched guidelines to guide the people where they're going to go. And here again, you can see the guidelines more clearly. This is at times 100 at the top there. You can also see that there is a white filler that has been put into these holes, and it was put there quite deliberately, so that it would pick out the design and make this fantastic, beautiful contrast between the white of the filler and the dark brown and black of the jet. And compositional analysis by Mary Davis has shown that this material was a mixture of calcium and barium sulfate that had been made into a paste with an organic binder. Calcium would have come from burnt bone, but there's no way of telling whether the bone had been human or animal. And this filler would have just made it really sing and stand out. Okay, traces of wear. There are quite a few indications that this necklace was far from new when it was buried, and same with the bracelet, although it's not as heavily worn as some necklaces are. The presence of cannel coal beads may well have been as locally made substitutes when individual beads in the necklace broke. And also, it's possible that the bracelet was made locally by somebody who wanted to emulate other parures of jewellery, and it was made from cannel coal somewhere in the west of Scotland. It's quite hard to source cannel coal. And you can see here 3 different examples of thread wear. We've seen the one at the terminal plate before. On the fastener, you can see a little hollow here, which is where the knots, or you can imagine putting the thread around there and making a knot and making it really, really tight. And then on one of the necklace beads here, you've got thread pull, which is actually worn or chipped off a little bit and made this U-shaped hollow at the end of the bead. You can also get bead on bead wear of varying kinds. And here, this is quite a drastic thing where the end of a bead has actually broken off because of the stress. And you get bead on plate wear. And you can see quite clearly here at the top right where one of the beads has actually worn a hollow into the edge there. And when you look at it here, you can see that the beads have sort of pulled to the right, yeah? And so it's smoothed over the surface there and made a sort of cup, or it's exacerbated the cup-shaped hollow on the plate. So for the anatomy of the necklace, where does it fit into the big story about early Bronze Age developments in Kilmartin Glen? Well, it dates from a time that we can justifiably regard as a golden age for the people who lived in the area. It was a time when the famous linear cemetery of imposing round cairns was made. quite possibly to bury a dynasty of leaders. The tragedy about Kilmartin Glen is that because the subsoil is gravel, with freely draining gravel, this means that groundwater, if it gets into a kist, it's going to make the bones decay away to nothing. And so in so many of these kists, people either found no bones whatsoever or tiny, tiny little fragments that powdered away to dust, which is very frustrating. But the Glen had had a very long and fascinating history as a landscape of ceremony and ritual long before that. There's no time to go into great detail, but I simply want to highlight certain things along the way. Oh, and not forgetting, of course, that in one of these huge early Bronze Age round cairns at Netherlargy, the capstone was made by prizing off a piece of living rock that had ancient cup marks pecked into it, cup and ring designs, Atlantic rock art. And what people then did was to add several pecked designs showing metal axe heads there. And this was used as the underside of the capstone of the kist. And it's thought, quite plausibly, that the representation of axe heads was a representation of the thing that gave the wealth and power to the person who was buried inside it. So the people here in Kilmartin got wealthy and powerful because they were able to control the flow of Irish metal, copper, and possibly copper that had been alloyed with tin to make bronze, northeastwards up the Great Glen to northeast Scotland, and also into England. So Kilmartin Glen was a really pivotal point in this trading network or exchange network. But before that, as early as 3600, if not slightly before, the Neolithic farmers built a wonderful megalithic monument called a Clyde cairn here at Netherlargy South. And then in the early Bronze Age, the people gave it a makeover and they actually changed the shape of its cairn from a probably trapezoidal shape to a round shape to make it look like the other ones that they were just building in the Glen. This is a fascinating monument, and the pottery in there shows that the people had contacts with northeast Scotland as early as this time. And also early on in the Neolithic, or early to middle, on Upper Largy, where the quarry, behind the quarry is now, there was a timber cursus monument that would have involved the chopping down of many, many large oak trunks to build it. So this dates to somewhere between 3800 and 3650 BC. And it was made so that people could do processions, and it was made so that it could be burnt down deliberately as part of the theatre, the drama of the ceremony there. And then around 3000 or 2900 BC, Kilmartin Glen got caught up in the most amazing, very extensive network of contacts that put them in contact with the people up in Orkney, and this extensive network of contacts extended right the way down into Ireland. And in Orkney, an amazing society was developing where basically the prosperous cattle farmers there were competing with each other to build the biggest and best, finest a funerary monument for their dead. And so some of them had heard about Newgrange in the Boyne Valley, this amazing passage tomb in the east of Ireland. They sailed down there. They copped the idea. They built Maze Howe. They also borrowed the sacred symbolism that they found in the Irish passage tombs. And they took the spiral design, which may well be associated with the movement of the sun. It could be a symbol of immortality or infinity, rather. And they gave it a particularly Orcadian twist. So they created a motif called the Orkney horned spiral. And if you look down the west coast of Scotland, all the way down, they also invented the stone circle and henge at the Stones of Stenness. And you can see stone circles all the way down the west of Scotland. So you can see at Callanish, this was inspired by the Stones of Stenness. And beside the circle at Callanish, you get Orcadian grooved ware, which was something that they invented at the time. You have Orcadian style grooved ware in Kilmartin Glen. You have it at Tormore on the Machrie Moor on the Isle of Arran. And so really we're dealing with an incredibly sophisticated society. It was at this time that Templewood stone circles a stone circle south, and the timber circle followed by a stone circle at Templewood North were built. And here, another of Aaron Watson's superb images. He went to Achnabrec. He studied the rock art there. This is an Orcadian horn spiral design. So the people in Kilmartin Glen must have been up to Orkney. They must have been to the Ness of Brogga, witnessed the midwinter solstice celebrations there. They used Templewood South for midwinter solstice celebrations, and Aaron has noticed that you see the Achnabrec design at its very best at midwinter solstice. So we're talking about probably 2900 BC. Even more amazingly, I mean, the story of Kilmartin Glen is a phenomenal story, and it's very well explained in Kilmartin Museum. So a recent find is this capstone on an early Bronze Age kist, which again had been prized from the living rock. But at this time, instead of having cup and ring marks, there were deer pecked into it. And this was the capstone of a large kist under a large round mound at Duncraigig. And the other place where you get deer just like this is Galicia in northwest Spain. And you also get the Atlantic rock art, the cup and ring complex designs, all the way down the Atlantic facade as far as Galicia. And I think it's not stretching the imagination or stretching credibility to say that this is likely to date somewhere to between 2900 and 2500 BC. So the inhabitants of Kilmartin Glen would have been fantastically cosmopolitan and well-travelled at that time. And talking of well-travelled, around 2500 or 2400, new people came into the Glen. And there's this amazingly important grave that was found at Upper Largy. It was excavated before it got quarried away. And as normal, the bones didn't survive. But essentially, the shape of the grave and the pots, the 3 beakers that were found inside, are of classic European design. You could have lost this whole thing, the grave and the grave goods, in the Netherlands or in parts of northern France. And on the bottom left, you can see a parallel from Poitiers in France. And there seemed to have been timber uprights surrounding the grave. And there was probably a wooden grave chamber here. The flint thing includes a striker light. So the dead person had been sent off into the other world with 3 pots with large amounts of something nice to drink. Whenever they've done analysis of the contents of beakers, surprisingly, it's turned out to be milk. So I think we'd rather like to think of it as probably fermented milk. But in some cases, they found meadowsweet. So perhaps in some cases, they had ale in. Now, these pots have been reconstructed, and here they are in their absolutely magnificent, glorious state now. These are international beakers of international significance, and they're one of the, if you go to Kilmartin just for one reason, go and see these pots. Necklace. And we know from a huge European-wide DNA sampling project that's looked at the DNA of the people buried with beakers, they found a really complicated picture of genetic ancestry. So it's thought that this particular pottery style originated in Iberia. And there was no genetic difference between the people buried with beakers, these earliest beakers, and the people who were there before. The same goes for Central Europe, where some centuries before they had had an influx of people from the Eurasian steppes, which gave them a genetic signature that's different from that of the Iberians here. But when they looked at the so-called beaker people from Britain, they found that they must have been immigrants coming from different parts of the continent. So some people came from the Netherlands, some people came from the Middle Rhine, from central Germany, and it's likely that some people came from Brittany, although in Brittany, like in Kilmartin Glen, but for a different reason, bones don't survive. They don't survive because the soil is very granitic and very acidic. But they found that there was a 90% genetic turnover in the population of Britain, which is quite a phenomenal thing. Now, we're not talking about population wipeout, but certainly the people who came from the continent, bringing their funny foreign ways, they were certainly welcomed by the local community, and they must have interbred with the local community. They didn't come all in a single oneer. There wasn't any sort of crisis in Europe that made them come. So some of them came as metal prospectors, and they opened up a copper mine in southwest Ireland. There's a guy called the Amesbury Archer buried near Stonehenge, and he probably came because he was drawn by the wonders of Stonehenge, because by that time the Sarsens had gone up at Stonehenge. Other people, families, may well have come just because they wanted to move somewhere. So fascinating people. But also then, and also these people introduced the knowledge of metal and metalworking. So we're talking about copper and gold here. And they had other innovations, such as the use of burying people individually. And if we dial forward about 300 years to 2200, the early Bronze Age, as I said before, was a time where people got rich very quickly, and their wealth was based on control of Irish metal. The copper that came from the Ross Island copper mine in County Kerry. And this is the Irish links are reflected in the pottery, so that at the top right, there's this magnificent food vessel of Irish type, could well have been made by an expert Irish potter who had come over. And this was from the Glebe Cairn, just down from the Kilmartin Museum. And at the bottom right, there is a fantastic pot where the upper part of it is Irish, but it's got 4 little stumpy legs, and those are what you find on Yorkshire food vessels. So that, and the fact that they're getting Whitby jet necklaces, reminds us that their contacts weren't just to the southwest, to Ireland, and to northeast Scotland, but also to England as well. And here, this is the grave that contained that wonderful pot with its little dumpy legs. And interestingly, it was right next door to the earlier Beaker grave, even though it must have been about 300 years later. So we have no idea whether this person was a descendant of the person who had been the Beaker person rather, the Flying Dutchman. So other things that they did, not only did they make these resplendent round cairns, but they also appropriated by then ancient monuments. I've mentioned before that they changed the design of the Clyde cairn to make its cairn round. At sort of Templewood South, they filled in the centre and made it into a ring cairn, which was a very popular style of cairn up at the northeast. If you go to the Claver cairns near Inverness, you'll see lots that are just like this here. And in the middle here and on the right, you can see where people have appropriated ancient rock art and have used it in their graves. So the Baden slab has used late Neolithic rock art here. And I firmly believe that the Templewood South stone circle was actually dismantled, and they reused the stones in some of their kists or in some of their graves. So you can see here, this is a kist with very, very, very big, deep slabs here. And it could be that at least one of these slabs had been taken from the adjacent stone circle there. Now, if we go back to the necklaces and kind of look at them in terms of what the vocabulary of esteem was during the early Bronze Age, between 2200 and 1950 BC. So if you are a high-ranking man, you will be buried with your persona in death as being somebody who is a brave warrior or hunter or both. So very often men would be buried with archery equipment and with a dagger. And the funny thing at the top, this is actually from Kent. It's a beautiful, elaborate jet belt fitting. You would put the other end of the belt through it, belt fastener. And very occasionally you get battle axes as well, or battle axe heads. But there is one miniature example from Tetney in Lincolnshire, where they found a complete miniature battle axe, which is absolutely superb. So that's for Sir. For Modom, I mean, yes, gender wasn't an issue in those days. There were very clear gender demarcations, and they looked one way, women looked a different way. And so Modom, if you're a high-ranking woman, you would be buried, if you're very lucky, with a jet necklace. And it would either be a spacer plate necklace or it could be a disc bead necklace, like you see in the middle. And sometimes you get these parures, these sets of jewellery, where you have one or two arm ornaments as well. So you can see a bracelet, a spacer plate bracelet here. You can see two gold armlets from Lockington. And also this is one of a pair of bronze ones that was found at Melfort, along with jet necklace pieces. But sadly, the other one of the pair never made it into a museum and it's missing. But you can see the decoration on these. These are skeuomorphs of these beads. They're sort of little barrel-shaped things there. You also get some objects which are unisex. So these V-perforated jet buttons, the big ones are only found with men, and they were probably used to fasten a large outer cloak. And likewise, with a lot of men, you get them in jackets with 5 or 6 buttons. But women, you can find them in women's graves where they have been reused as beads in necklaces or as decorative studs. And then there are classes of object where we just honestly don't know whether they were associated with men or with women, but we suspect probably men. No gold lunula has yet been found with a body. And if we look at spacer plate necklaces more generally, you'll see that actually Poltalloch lies within an area in the west of Scotland of relatively high density of these things. I mean, these be incredibly precious. And you can see in the eastern side of the country, you find them where the agricultural land is very, very good, where people could have built up a surplus and could have become wealthy because they're able to farm very, very well. It was slightly more of a challenge to farm very well in the west of Scotland, but clearly they made use of the sea there. And so, as I said before, Kilmartin was at this amazingly good position to go up the Great Glen up to the northeast of Scotland, and that's exactly what people did. And you can see here several of the necklaces that have been found in the area. So this one is from Mount Stewart on the Isle of Bute. There were 2 that were found at Campbelltown. There was one at Monibachach, at Skipness, and one part of one was found at Ardfin Forest on Jura. And then this is the Melfort stuff. And it's really, really interesting. The beads are in the British Museum, whereas the actual armlet is in the National Museum Scotland, or National Museum of Scotland, on display. I've had a very close look at the Melfort beads in the British Museum, and clearly what you've got is pieces from at least 4 and possibly 5 different necklaces. Now, some of these were from a necklace that wasn't very old. Others are from necklaces that were very old. So clearly these things could be curated over several generations. We don't know whether they would have, I mean, if they had strung it up, it would look a bit odd, but clearly it was still very precious to them, and it probably had the additional preciousness of being passed down, so it had ancestral power as well as everything else. And we have this lovely example here of possible necklace wars where 2 young ladies were found, one at Mount Stewart on Bute and one on Inchmarnock, which is a tiny little island off the west coast of Bute. And the one at Inchmarnock was old. It was part of 6 necklaces, and they rebored one of the spacer plates to try and get 10. They wanted to have 10 rows of these beads strands. But and it was different from the Mount Stewart one, which wasn't very old, and it had this nice decoration on it. And it's all Whitby jet, rather than being a mixture of materials here. However, this one's got 134 beads, and I think that in the competition, if they really were in competition with each other, and for all we know, they might have known each other, this one's the winner. And I said before several times that these are skeuomorphs of gold lunally, as indeed they are. So you can see here how closely they parallel the designs and the decoration of gold lunally here. And if you look at the distribution patterns, they are actually complementary. So most lunally, over 80 have been found in Ireland, with only a scattering of them elsewhere. In fact, one was found near Whitby, which is very, very interesting. Whereas jet spacer plate necklaces are mostly within the northern part of Britain. There are about 82 of them known here, and you can see the concentration there. Scotland was one of the places where you get both spacer plate necklaces and gold lunally. Now, this raises the question, was there perhaps a duality of symbolism, so that the gold lunarly were associated with men, and they certainly had an association with the sun? Because if you're wearing one of these things, it's like putting a buttercup to your chin. You capture the power of the sun. And indeed, my colleague Mary Cahill, the expert on Irish gold from National Museum of Ireland, has suggested that the shape of the lunarly was a boat that would carry the sun. The jet necklaces, we know that they're associated with women. So could it be that they had some kind of association with the moon? We honestly don't know. Or is there a more prosaic thing? Is it that in Scotland, where they loved gold lunarly, but they couldn't get enough gold to make many of their own, but they could have access to Whitby jet, that they actually commissioned the jet ones to be made? So these would be just as good as the gold ones in their minds. Moving on to the concept of supernatural power dressing. I don't know if any of you, I know Anna Ritchie, hello, you were there at the fantastic exhibition at the old National Museum of Antiquities of Scotland, Symbols of Power at the Time of Stonehenge, that was organised by my ex-boss, Dr. David Clark. This was a fabulous exhibition. And this is Gordon Richardson, a male model. And it was taken in 1984, and I think it's safe to assume that Gordon probably doesn't look the same as he did then, but the gold necklace that he is wearing, and nobody would be allowed to wear one now, looks exactly as it did then, and exactly as it did 4,000 years ago. But so we're used to the concept of these things being, they're rare, they're very precious, they're symbols of power, of temporal power. They show people how important you are. But were they also supernatural power dressing? They're of such rare and precious materials. Could it be that people believed that the materials themselves and the objects made of those materials had agency? So they are magical. They have the power to protect you while you're living and to protect you on that dangerous journey into the afterlife after you die. I think it's reasonable to assume that. So the choice of using jet is a very interesting one. As I said before, you can see it being used at different times. So the Romans loved it. So there's a little Roman hairpin with a smiley face on the left. There's a Roman Medusa pendant at the bottom. The Vikings also, the Romans mined it. The Vikings mined it too, probably. Or at least they exploited it in quite large amounts. And associated with the geological layers, you get a lot of strata with ammonites. And the Vikings made those ammonites into snakes. And so this was an amuletic pendant. And in Asturias in northern Spain, you also get very high quality jet. And this is a wonderful figure. And if you go to Santiago de Compostela, St. James is associated with jet. And what the Christian church did was to realize the power of the pagan belief in what jet could do for you. And so they kind of harnessed that and said, okay, St. James is also associated with jet. Interestingly, there are early accounts, particularly by Roman writers, to say that it can heal you. It's very, very good to heal illnesses and protect from evil, and particularly women's problems. So the late Roman writer Pliny said that the kindling of jet drives off snakes and relieves suffocation of the uterus. Its fumes detect attempts to stimulate a disabling illness or a state of virginity. When boiled with wine, it cures toothache, and if combined with wax, scrofulous tumours. So, who needs a dentist? Ha! And it was used by the three wise men in their divination. And likewise, Galen, who was another of these early writers, said, useful for treating womb diseases, swellings of the knee, and closing up bloody wounds. So, and again, all around the world, even now, if you can buy your athebache when you go to Santiago de Compostela, and it'll say, here's a little higa design, and this will bring you good luck and love. And all around the world, people have the same sets of beliefs. And the same beliefs have been applied to amber. Now, the thing about both jet and amber is that they are warm to the touch. They are light, they float, and they can burn. And they're electrostatic. Yeah, so it's like if you rub a balloon against your jersey and put it up to your hair, it'll lift your hair up. So I'm sure people were fully aware of all of these properties, and indeed amber used to be called the tears of the, beg your pardon, tears of the sun. So why not in the early Bronze Age and in other periods of prehistory as well? I'm quite sure that was the case. And then if we dial forward in time, very, very slightly, or overlapping in time, down in Wessex, the area around Stonehenge, people were getting very rich very quickly by controlling the flow of tin from Cornwall and Devon. Because around 2200 BC, continental prospectors, probably from Central Europe, came looking for tin, and they found it. It's one of the most significant sources, the Southwest English source, particularly in the Carnan Valley. And they also found gold there as well. And they exported that gold to Ireland at 2200 BC, and it's actually Cornish gold that was used to make those Irish lunarly. Anyway, so a very flourishing, highly hierarchical society grew up in early Bronze Age Wessex, and they used a whole variety of materials for their supernatural power dressing. And it's a little bit like kind of Posh and Beck's level bling. I love it, but it's kind of OTT. And one of the things that they did was to look at fashions further north in Britain, and then they trumped it. So they took buttons and they made unfeasibly large buttons and they coated them with gold. They took the jet spacer plate necklaces and they said, ha ha, I raise you. So they imported large amounts of raw amber from northwest part of the Jutland Peninsula. We know it was there because there are objects from Wessex that ended up there. And they made amber spacer plate necklaces. So I mentioned the Inchmarnock necklace has got 136 beads. This Upton Lovell one had over 1,000 beads. So this is amazing, conspicuous consumption here on, supernatural power dressing things. And another material that started to be used, possibly just before 2000 BC, was faience, which is an early form of glass. And making it is a sort of magical transformation of raw materials. You start off with sand. You have something like plant ash, which is there to lower the melting point of the sand. And you've got something containing copper because you want that to create the turquoise color of the glaze. And you mix a paste of this material, and very often they would add additional tin, which is another of these magical materials, which is very difficult to extract from cassiterite, the raw thing. And you make this jewel-like beads. And here you see a variety. They came in various kinds of shapes and sizes. And this one here is from Cossington in Leicestershire, where the faience paste was just a little bit too runny. And so it was meant to be spherical, but it ended up looking like a sort of droopy orange. Great stuff. So faience, and in fact, well, people used to believe, because you get beads just like this in Egypt, that people had come from from Egypt to Britain with pockets bulging with beads. That's not the case at all. Yes, faience was invented in Egypt and Mesopotamia about 5000 BC, but the story of how it got to Britain is a long and complicated one. And to cut a long story short, it was probably because of contact with Central Europe, these tin prospectors and these metalworkers in Central Europe, that they said to people in Britain, to the metalworkers there, "Oi, here are these beautiful beads. Do you want to know how to make them?" And so that's how faience making came to Britain. So if you believe that these were amuletic, it's no surprise that you find them in these composite necklaces, which you get loads and loads of in the area around Stonehenge. And then you get people elsewhere emulating them. So here's a nice example from Cossington in Leicestershire, where you get jet, faience and amber beads. In Exlo in the Netherlands, they had tin beads, faience beads, tubular bronze beads and amber beads. And at Tara in County Meath, in a very, very interesting case, a young man was buried wearing one of these things, because normally, as with the jet necklaces, these are associated with women. And the kind of materials that they used they were all rare, they were all special, mostly rare anyway, special. Kimmeridge shale. In one case, they used stalactites from a cave in the Mendips. And here, in a fairly recent find on White Horse Hill and Dartmoor, they used amber, tin, Kimmeridge shale and baked clay to make one of these things. This is an interesting one because it was on the route, the supply route from Cornwall and Devon to Wessex, and there aren't very many rich graves in the supply areas, and it's the same old story. So the people who are doing all the hard work don't actually get rewarded for it. Although there must have been a few families on the routes to Wessex who were able to profit from it. And then having got to Wessex, the people in Wessex then sent this tin down to the continent and all around Britain and Ireland. And the bones of a young woman were found wrapped in bear fur, would you believe? And there was a jewellery box that was absolutely fantastic, made of I think it was willow bast. There was a piece of costume of deer skin with again, woven, I think it's willow bast fabric in it, and then 2 pairs of turned wooden studs. So 1 pair would have been for her ears, and 1 pair could well have been labrets to go through her lips. So you can see here that this individual was sent off to the other world with as much supernatural power as could be mustered. And then, if you really want the sort of the archetypal and yet unique example of supernatural power dressing, here is the bone points that were found with a man at Upton Lovell in Wiltshire, and he used to be called the shaman's grave. And recent analytical work by Christina Tsoraki has found that some of the things that were buried with him, including old battle axe heads of stone, these had been used for gold working because she's found traces of gold on them. So I think here that's probably a good place to sort of stop this rather broad review of supernatural power dressing. And I hope that I've made the point that the Poltalloch jewellery was a prime example of this widespread phenomenon. And so here you have a very, very important young woman. We don't know how she died, but she was certainly sent into the afterworld dressed fabulously. And if like me, you just want to get more hands-on jet experience, I can highly recommend the jet workshops that are run by Emma Wynne-Jones, who's, hello Emma, hi, of Ancient Craft. They're absolutely fantastic, and she makes jewellery and she puts them in cool little boxes like this, which have the Poltalloch necklace as the logo. So I think the future of jet studies is extremely bright indeed, and I welcome any questions as long as they're simple. Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was super. And hello, Emma, as well. I'll just see it's lovely to see you here as well. And the lovely picture there of everyone at Kilmartin Museum doing that fantastic workshop that you ran. So is there any questions for Alison at all? I was just having a look around, or I can't see any on the messages. I think so far we've had fascinating and very interesting talk. Thoroughly enjoyed it, Alison. But I think it was such a full talk that I don't know if everyone has many questions. So is there anyone who would like to ask anything at all?
I wonder if I might be able to ask Alison a question, Jacqueline.
Yes, of course, Sharon.
Sharon.
Hello. Thank you so much for that talk. That was absolutely brilliant. I'm just wondering, what do you see the kind of future research directions for Kilmartin and that time period? I mean, I know we've talked about the Spit and the Symposium and various other times, but especially relating to the jet jewellery and the other kind of high status artefacts that we can see, or we see or evidence of in Kilmartin.
Yes, that's a very good question. I think, well, one obvious lead is the tiny little bits of human remains. So Thomas Bryce was based in Glasgow University, and we need to go back to it would be Kelvin Grove. Well, we can also ask the Hunterian as well, to see whether, tucked away somewhere, they might just have these. And also, well, I mean, it's not very, it's kind of slightly distasteful to want to go and reopen graves and whip the bones out that had been put back in them. However, I'm guilty. I did that on Inchmarnock, and actually nowadays you're able to do fantastic things.
Yeah.
You can do isotopic analysis to work out what people ate and where they came from. You can do DNA analysis as well, which is, if you're lucky, which is just brilliant. So, for all we know, there may well be more kists that are waiting to be found, and if you're very lucky, they would have well-preserved human remains in them. I think certainly, mea culpa, there's a lot that I need to do in actually publishing, get out all the research that I and my colleagues have done on these necklaces and publish them absolutely fully, so that at least you get there the kind of the chapter and verse on every bead and every component. It would be the most boring, well, it won't be boring at all, really, but because we've already done it. Where am I? Here we are. There's this book called Ritual in Early Bronze Age Grave Goods that did it to a whole load of English early Bronze Age jewellery. So I would kind of urge you to take a look at that. And yeah, you can do that for Kilmartin. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. I do have a post-it note that's been stuck to my laptop about Bryce, actually, to try and track down or see whether the human remains that he took back to Glasgow are still there somehow. And I suspect they probably are, but I wonder if they're maybe just not labelled Kilmartin.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yes. Yeah. So, you always kind of assume that everything that is known about things in museum is known. No, it's not. No, there's always amazing things to find out.
Totally. Thank you.
There is a question from John. John Bernard, do you want to ask it, John, or shall I ask it for you? You can unmute and ask it directly.
Sure. It's actually Lynn.
Oh, is it? Lynn.
Yeah, that's okay. I didn't change the picture. I'm on his hat there on the paddle border. Yes, you mentioned there might be evidence that these were very valuable pieces of jewelry passed down among maybe family or dynasties or something, but then they did end up as gifts in a grave. So what happened? How did that happen?
Yes, that's the question. We honestly don't know what guided the decision that now is the time when we really want to, when this person is so deserving or needing to go to the other world wearing one of these things. And there is a huge variability in the age and condition of these necklaces. And in fact, one of the things that I have been doing for the last 30 plus years is to check the decoration on all of the plates to see whether there are any matches up. Wouldn't that be lovely? Haven't found any yet, but you never know. And certainly with the composite necklaces, which are later than these, the composite necklaces are mostly about, say, 1750 BC. What they were doing there was swapping between friends and between generations. So I would give to you a bead, you would give to me a bead, and there would be my granny's beads in it as well. So you are kind of, it's almost like the New Zealand, the Maori concept of mana, so the necklace takes on the life force of the people who have owned it before. Yeah. So we can say for sure that whoever was buried with these was accorded very special status. Within archaeological theory, there are these fashions. So some people are saying, "Oh, you shouldn't talk about elites anymore." La 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 la. I think that's nonsense. Personally, I think you can talk about elites, and I think that in Kilmartin, it's a sort of standing out or outstanding example of where you have elite practices, where they are indulging in conspicuous consumption in the funerary realm, and in the ceremonies that go around that when you're burying somebody. So I think it was really, they were saying this person is very, very special indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And there's a question from Margaret. Margaret, do you want to ask it yourself?
Yes, thank you. Yes, the dotted patterns that appear on the flat plates. Do you have any thoughts as to whether they're simply for aesthetic purposes, or whether they themselves might have had some magical meaning, possibly?
That's a wonderful question, and it's one that the late Joan Taylor thought about a lot. because she was thinking in terms of the decoration that you get on lunarly, which is very, very similar to what you get on the spacer plates. And she said, actually, if you look at a lot of beaker pottery, you get the same motifs there. And you could add to that actually, if you look at a lot of food vessel pottery, which was beaker pottery started off being continental, then it developed locally. And then one of the responses to it, or one of the local developments, was people started to build, to make pots which were slightly different, but they were made in exactly they were used in the same way. We call them food vessels. Anyway, so this sharing of designs in different media, yes, I think they may well have had some kind of meaning, but it's always incredibly difficult to get at the specific meaning. I don't think it was less. I mean, they liked their diamonds, their lozenges, but that's not to say that they would have had the same significance as the late Neolithic lozenges that you find on grooved ware pottery and on the Baden slab, for example. So I think all we can do is speculate and also narrow down our dating of these things. So we're lucky with the jet necklaces. I have done targeted dating programs, and and other people have dated them too, so that we've now got a good body of dates. Yeah, so we say that, okay, they were made and used between 2200 and 1950 BC, and then occasionally individual components might pass down generations after that and end up as maybe a single bead in 1750 or something like that BC. And we can go back, now that we've dated beakers, and say, okay, what date are the beakers that are most similar to the lunarly? I think with lunarly themselves, they're probably about the same date as the spacer plate necklaces, but they probably came first. So that hasn't really answered your question. I think, to be perfectly honest, the answer is we don't know, and it would be incredibly difficult to work out how you could work out what the meaning is. But they certainly weren't doodles, for sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, look, thank you very much, Alison. Lots of praise. How much people enjoyed this. This talk will be, because it's recorded, we will be playing it again. So if you want to watch back on anything, it'll be there probably next month. So all it takes for me to say is thank you very much, Alison. That was brilliant. And on behalf of Kilmartin Museum, thank you to everybody for sharing the evening with us. It's been fantastic. The sun has just come out, popped between the clouds in Kilmartin too, so it's obviously shining on you, Alison, at the moment. And I look forward to hearing all your comments and suggestions when we send out the feedback form, which will be emailed to you shortly. I think probably tomorrow it'll arrive at your in your inbox. So thank you very much indeed. We do have some more talks coming up this year, but we're having a break next month. And then we've got a talk about outdoor swimming and the mixture with Gaelic as well, and being outside with one of our locals, Dan Coyle, doing that. And then the following month in October, we've got Tursha Barnett talking about the carvings that you mentioned there, Alison. So she's going to go into a bit more detail. So I think for all of us, if you want to open up your microphones and say thank you to Alison, that would be great, or give her a wee round of applause from us all, that would be super. So thank you very much, Alison. That was excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you. And cheerio, everyone, and we'll see you next time.